Before we get started, just a quick update for the podcasting community in academia and higher education. Higher Ed PodCon is in Cleveland in July this summer. And for year 2, we've expanded to 2 full days of sessions, conversations, and practical discussions focused entirely on podcasting in higher education. We have over 30 speakers lined up from the US, Canada, UK, and even Italy. I am really excited about the diversity of voices from a broad range of institutions speaking at PodCon this summer. We have our full list of sessions on the website. Early registration is still open. We've worked really hard to keep the cost of attending as reasonable as possible. Registration actually includes breakfast and lunch both days. And you'll see we've negotiated some super affordable hotel rates nearby. So please join us July 16th and 17th. You can learn more and register at higheredpodcon.com. higheredpodcon.com. Hope to see you there.
But then sometimes we just talk about things that have nothing to do with science. And I actually love those. And it's possible that I'm better at those because I know less. And so the chances, just as you were saying, of me falling into jargon and not even realizing, that's much less likely in an area where I'm clueless. So I do feel comfortable in those clueless areas. One of my a nice personality feature is I'm not too worried about my dignity. So if I come across as clueless in an area, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm fine to look clueless.
Welcome to Continuing Studies, a podcast for higher education podcasters who want to learn, connect, and get inspired. I'm Neil McFedrin, founder of higheredpods.com and Podium Podcast Company.
And I'm Jennifer Lee, founder of JPod Creations. Podcasting is broadcasting. If you're podcasting in higher ed, you're not alone. There's a fast-growing community out there, and we're here to help you tap into it.
We want to hear from you. Later this week, I am going to be in Leeds at ePod. Yes. So if you're there, let me know. I'd love to chat with you in person. So Jen, this episode, we are chatting with Russ Altman from Stanford. I have been working with Russ for a number of years with his podcast there, so I'm super excited to have Russ on. And Russ is the Kenneth Fong Professor of Bioengineering, Genetics, Medicine, Biomedical Data Science, and by courtesy, Computer Science. Yes, 5 different faculties. And if that's not enough, he's also the host of the Future of Everything podcast, which has been running since 2017. And they're at about 315 episodes now. Quite amazing. And so that's a weekly show. So that's also a big chunk of Russ's time. And I am super excited to jump into this conversation and to get nitty gritty about his journey. And we have some really good inside baseball on this one about podcasting and interviewing other smart people from Stanford. Let's jump into it. Russ, so great to have you here on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited.
So Russ, I'm quite familiar with the Future of Everything, but maybe for the listeners who may not know about the show, can you give us a quick little overview?
So this is a podcast that comes out of Stanford University. I'm a faculty member at Stanford University. I'm in 5 departments, and they're all kind of in medicine or engineering. We started out as a SiriusXM radio show for a couple of years. It was a very good relationship with SiriusXM, but about 5-6 years ago, we realized this was really a podcast. And that's when we met you, because you helped us with this transition. Turns out being a radio show and being a podcast is not exactly the same. And in fact, we needed to tighten things up, and you were really helpful. But what we do is I talk to scholars at Stanford about how their work is inventing the future. The easy way to remember that is to think about like scientists who are discovering stuff or engineers who are building stuff. But it turns out we've branched out and we talk to lawyers and business people. And really, scholars are all about discovering new knowledge. And it turns out that most is useful for the future. And that's where we got the name, The Future of Everything. So far, it's been entirely Stanford faculty. I have a very deep bench of highly vetted faculty colleagues. We've thought every now and then about going outside. There's a lot of interesting people out there. But after 310 episodes, we're not even close to getting through all of the good people that I want to talk to.
And Russ, I'm really glad to finally meet you and learn more about the future of everything, because I hear so much about it through Neil. Besides being on radio, has your show switched the format, or have you learned a lot of different things from when you first started to now?
I had a really great kind of Yoda type producer at Sirius, David Hall. He's a radio guy, and he would give me sandwiches, little feedback sandwiches. You're doing great. It's awesome. Then what he really wanted to tell me, got to stop doing this, do more of this. And I'm very grateful. We came up with the idea of a 15-minute segment and a 10-minute segment. That was like 25. And when you added the intros and the outros, it just got to around 30 minutes, which was a very radio-friendly time. So our format really hasn't changed very much. What's changed the most is I used to give pretty long-winded intros where I did a lot of research and I set up the guest and I gave a little tutorial about the topic that we were going to be discussing so that the listeners would understand any jargon that might come up. And over time, they just said, no, these can be shorter and shorter. And now I literally compose them with a couple of quick jots before I do the intro. And it's just 5-6 sentences. And it used to be a page and a half of typed text. And so that's the big change, is that you don't really need to do a big long-winded intro. You can actually do the intro by the questions that you ask the guest at the beginning of the interview. So that's a much more interactive way to get the basic information out.
Speaking of intros, we actually, at the beginning, we've added a little 45-second segment from you where you revisit the original purpose of the show from 2017. Yeah. And recently, there was a feeling that we needed to go back and address that original reasoning.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that intention and why it still exists and it's still important today?
Yeah. So Sirius came to us around 2016, 2017, when I was extremely aware of like public mistrust of science. And that has only kind of continued. But I said, okay, this is not a bad time to do something like this, because if I can get scientists just being real about what they do, why they do it, it might take away this kind of ivory tower. These are just like elitists who are like, they can't relate to people. They're working on things that don't really matter. And so my hypothesis was that we could bring science to regular people and make the case implicitly that these are just talented people thinking hard about hard problems that face the world and trying to make a little bit of progress. And so I was actually going for people who weren't thinking about science very much. You know that Sirius Radio comes installed with new cars. You get it for 2 or 3 months, and some people renew it. Well, one of the things I found out is the number one car sold that has Sirius installed is the Ford F-150 truck. And I loved that. And in fact, we even did some cross promotions on Sirius with the trucking shows. And the idea was to try to get the guys who are driving F-150s, and some of them I'm sure listen, but we were trying to get more of them to listen because we thought, okay, let's see if we can hit that demographic and interest them. And then what happened is we didn't really have data about this, but it was our sense from the statistics that we did have that we weren't really hitting that group very much. And it was the NPR crowd. And we love the NPR crowd. There's nothing bad to say about the NPR crowd. But the NPR crowd is already interested in science, and we're grateful for their listening. But part of putting this little header at the top of each show is so that maybe somebody will say, maybe I should give this a listen. This is not my normal kind of thing, but maybe this guy can make it interesting and accessible. So I think that's still a work in progress, but that's one of the founding tools, is to make it real and make it relatable.
And that's the thing that I like, because I think after talking to a lot of higher education podcasters out there, sometimes it's really hard to make your topic relatable to everybody, because when we're experts, we like to use a lot of high intellectual jargon. And sometimes people don't necessarily know what that is. Or sometimes the topics, I'm not being mean, can be very dry.
You are right. So I consider one of my main jobs as a host is to be the jargon police. Somebody will say, I get funding from the NIH. I usually say that's National Institutes of Health. They fund biomedical research. And I know that most people know that, but not everybody knows that. And so acronyms and jargon. And what my producer, David, who I talked about, he said, Russ, one of the things that I like is sometimes people are talking about their work and they're going off into Never Never Land, and you're pretty good on the fly at coming up with analogies. In fact, we were just talking about this. I was talking to a guy who did ultra fast electronics, and he was talking about atoms and how they move in materials. And it was pretty technical. And I said, well, you're kind of saying like these atoms are like water in a river, and like there's little eddies at the edge, but there's the main line in the middle. And he actually liked that analogy, and he picked it up and worked with it. And that was like a moment of like nirvana, right? When I actually get the guests to adopt my analogy of their work And then they start talking at this level where everybody can understand it because everybody knows what a river is.
That's great.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. Otherwise, yeah.
You did kind of allude to it off the top, but although a lot of the episodes are science and this is from the School of Engineering and you're from a number of other STEM faculties, but you do open up that aperture wider, correct?
Yeah, and I love that. We had a former president of Estonia on, and that was a real kind of whoa. He was visiting Stanford as a visiting faculty, and we were actually talking about cybersecurity. And I said to him, well, I know you were the former president of Estonia, but like, why are you a cybersecurity expert? And he said, Russ, have you ever looked at a map? Estonia shares hundreds of miles of border with Russia. And he said, and they are constantly trying to hack into our systems. So if you're president, you're an expert on cybersecurity. And it was very relatable. And then we just talked about cybersecurity. But then sometimes we just talk about things that have nothing to do with science. And I actually love those. And it's possible that I'm better at those because I know less. And so the chances, just as you were saying, of me falling into jargon and not even realizing that we're talking shop and it's not really accessible, that's much less likely in an area where I'm clueless. So I do feel comfortable in those clueless areas. One of my I think a nice personality feature is I'm not too worried about my dignity. So if I come across as clueless in an area, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm fine to look clueless.
I like that. I also like the fact that, like you were saying, you kind of do other topics that are not necessarily science related, like your latest one, the future of influencers. And I just find that topic fascinating anyways, because some of the things you guys mentioned that people don't want to be doctors or astronauts, they want to be influencers. And it brought me back to when I worked in radio in a helicopter, and we had a pilot and he was from England and he had already had a career as a famous rock climber. But he would go around the UK on career day and talk to the students. And he would say, what do people want to do? And he said, every classroom, the whole classroom wanted to be influencers. And he's like, it's kind of scary because he said, I don't think they realize that they all can be that. So I thought that this topic was really relatable to me and probably a lot of other people.
Yeah, I loved that. It was super interesting to hear like what the dynamics are, where that comes from, what the chances of success are if you actually make a run at that. The first time I ever had anybody tell me they wanted to be an influencer was I was actually in Cuba. It was during a short period of time when Americans go to Cuba.
Oh, that was a very short time.
And I'm hanging out with a family that was kind of hosting us for dinner, and I'm talking to their 11-year-old boy who can't get internet, so he would get DVDs of the internet. And he would load them up and he would listen to the podcast late because he would get just hundreds of megabytes on DVDs that were like basically pirated out of the US and pirated into Cuba because Cuba had very strict rules. Anyway, this 11-year-old in Cuba says, I want to be an influencer. I almost fell off my chair.
You just said that you find the topics where it's not your field of expertise actually an easier way to interview.
Yeah.
I bet you there's lots of academics that are the opposite. They would feel quite uncomfortable with prepping for an interview where they're not deeply knowledgeable about the topic. Do you think that it's your general curiosity that's given you that comfort, or is it just the fact that you've been doing this for 300 plus episodes and you've kind of got your head around it?
Okay, so it's multifactorial. I have 3 kids, and I have one of my kids who is a little bit more like me, and she likes to make people laugh. And when she was a little girl, I said, you know, you're like me. You don't really worry about your dignity. And she said, what's dignity? And I said, well, let me give you an example. If you're at school and you think of something funny to say that would make you look a little bit stupid, but it would be really funny, would you say it? And she said, absolutely. I said, me too. I said, your sister and your brother wouldn't do that. And your mom wouldn't do that. And it's because you and I are willing to trade off our dignity for like entertainment value. And so that's part of my personality. The other thing is, I've been on the faculty of Stanford for like 34 years. So I have much less to lose. And in a funny way, if people want to judge what I know and what I don't know, I don't really care. You could imagine that as a young person, you're a little bit less secure for understandable reasons because your peers are judging you, your supervisors are, I mean, people might be judging me, but I don't care. It's fine. And so there's a certain comfort in your own shoes that I have just because of where I am. The other thing is that I know I'm a pretty good teacher, and I know that struggling with material with other people is a great way to learn. So I know that if I'm not on top of that topic, I'm probably going to ask more basic questions, which will allow the guest to bring me along, and that'll probably bring the guest along. So it's almost like a superpower that this kind of naive, I don't know a thing about this, leads to asking basic questions. And then the questions, of course, get more complicated. That's just what one of the listeners might do if they were in control of the interaction. And so I think it's all of these things together combined to make it hopefully pretty relatable and kind of not losing too many people as we go through the logic of what is sometimes extremely technical stuff.
Well, that's why I think you're also very approachable as well. And your guests like to talk to you because sometimes I find in intellectuals and professors, we kind of hold them up really high. And some people get really nervous around those type of people being like, he's got this huge successful show, but I don't know, like, why is he interviewing me? So I think that's why a lot of people feel really comfortable and you're able to lead them through that story.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. And I try to do that. I have had people who come on, you can tell from their emails before the show that they're super nervous, right? You can just tell. And so I have this rule, and it's mostly because I'm lazy, no contact with the guest. Partly because I do not want them to say awesome stuff to me that we're not capturing on the camera, right? Because that means we're already into the relationship and the guests and the listeners are not hearing it. So, and that really bugs some of them because I said, Russ, I really want to get together. I want to go over what we're going to talk about. And I say, I love you. We're not doing that. We're going to have a journey of discovery together. You can talk to my producer all you want. Send me all the notes. He'll tell me the things you want to be inbounds and out of bounds. Like all that stuff is fine, but I'm not going to talk to you.
I love that rule. Can I just say that? Because this is my biggest pet peeve in podcasting. And I know we do it as well. And Neil listens to me harp on this all the time. But in radio, you never got to do, like I used to interview rock stars and people of note and stuff like that. You don't do a pre-interview. And then 2, it's live. So you don't even have a chance of editing it. And then 3, I hate this idea that everybody asks for questions before they get on the podcast. I'm like, I'm not giving you my question.
That's a hard no. It's a hard no. I love that. And I didn't know that about radio and that experience, but that's exactly what my instinct is. And it was because of what I just said. I don't want them to say awesome stuff that we miss, right? And I definitely don't want to be like on the air saying, hey, before this, you told me this one thing. Could you tell me again in the same way? Because it was really cool. Absolutely not. And so I tell them, I don't even tell them the first question. I tell them for that first segment, right before I press record, I tell them, here's how it's going to go. I have my first question figured out. I'm going to ask you that. And then we're going to have 15 minutes that are going to be totally organic. I have no idea what's going to come next. It depends on what you say and then what I'm thinking and then what you're thinking. And it goes really well. But just because some people, you know, they just have different expectations and they want to talk about what questions are in bounds with me, or they want to say, here is a curated script for how it could go. And I just will not do that, especially for that first segment, what I call the organic first 15 minutes.
No, because sometimes you can have duds too when you give them the questions in advance and they gave them more nervous. And then I remember one time when I was interviewing someone on a podcast, because again, you can't do this in radio. Someone was like following verbatim and they, no joke, they were like, well, you didn't ask me the next question. And there it drives me psycho. And I didn't ask you that question because I'm a good interviewer and I'm piecing it together in my mind.
Yeah. This is why Jen and I work well together. We've been doing this for 3 years. This is why we work well together, because I like to sort of meet the person ahead of time. Jen refuses to. So I do reconnaissance.
But Neil, we didn't. I literally looked at my calendar this morning and said, I have no effing idea what Neil wants to talk to me about. So I'm going to give you full credit. Maybe you withheld your urges, but I loved the prep for this because it was zero.
We've talked to our audience about this before, Russ, but we've got a Google Docs and Jen's in it and I'm in it and Kylie is in it right now, who's our producer.
Yeah.
And we write notes and we talk to each other in it. I've outlined all these questions I want to ask you, and Jen typically does not follow it.
Boom.
But it's great because I just sort of keep us moving into the direction of covering the things we want to cover. And Jen always comes in with these great other things.
Let me tell you one little story, which you may know. But so I do prep, obviously. The day before, I Google stalk basically my guest. I do write down like a bunch of questions that I could ask. It's not scripted. They're not even in order. This is always done in longhand on a piece of paper. On the far left, I have what I call my emergency topics. And this is for you get a guest who actually answers questions with 3 words. And then you actually go through all your normal questions and you still have 10 minutes left in the interview and you've used all your questions up. So I always have 20 emergency topics. These are usually papers they wrote like 10 years ago on interesting topics, but they let me go into the discussion knowing that there's no way we're going to run out of stuff to talk about, because I could always say, hey, in 2015, you wrote a paper about how like peanuts can be used as projectiles or whatever. And then I know that we can have a conversation about that. So it's my emergency topics, so I don't get nervous about running out of material.
And that's great. I always tell people too, like, it's not that I'm not prepped. You need questions and you need to be prepped. It's a fine balance. And that's the thing is, it's like, even when I worked in radio before, everybody's prepped. Even the top podcasters are prepped. But it's how you're able to take that information and make it sound like you're not prepped. Sorry, Russ got me started on all my big...
Go for it. Talk to me.
Other big pet peeve is when people are like, I don't need to prep for my podcast. I just want to feel cool and loose. I want it to sound like off the cuff. And I said, you're not going to sound off the cuff if you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so true. That 1 hour that I spend trying to get into the brain of the guest, that pays off with spontaneous questions the next day.
That's great. That's good. Okay, so we just did this technique, which I've actually borrowed from you, Russ.
Or stole.
I sat, our regular producer was on spring break, and so I sat in on the background to help you with one of your interviews recently. And you do this mid-interview break. You actually are quite ardent about your time, and at the 20-minute mark or as close to it, you basically duck out, still rolling, but you duck out of the conversation you interview and talk about the next 10 minutes, essentially. So maybe just tell us a little bit about where that originated from. You're still doing it after all these years. So
yeah,
it must be a really useful tool.
So I think the best way to do this is to tell you, I give a speech to the guest moments before we go on air. And let me just give that speech.
Oh, please.
Thank you so much for being on the call. We're going to do this in 2 segments. The first segment is a 15-minute segment. We have the first question picked out, and then we are going to be organic. Wherever we go, it's all good. Then we're going to take a break. It's going to be a 2-3 minute break. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, what you want to talk about? And because you might think back on that 15 minutes and say, you know what? It was a great conversation, but I have all this stuff that I want to say about my work or my life or the choices I've made or whatever. And you didn't ask me about any of that, you know? And so at this point, during that break, you can say, Russ, please ask me about this and this and this, because that's what I wanted to talk about. So it gives me a little contract with them at the very beginning that if there's stuff that they want to get to, they will have a chance to tell me, and it's their first chance because I wouldn't talk to them before the interview. And then what I don't tell them is the second reason to do this is that in one of my very early episodes, we had this woman who was great. She was in cybersecurity, another cybersecurity person. And it was about North Korea and China and Iran and Russia, but it was all doom and gloom. And my producer took me aside and said, Russ, this is great, but like, you can't end on doom and gloom. If you do that too often, people are going to say, whenever I listen to Altman's podcast, I'm like depressed, and they just won't tune in because you're too depressing. So I want you to end on a positive. And so I said to her, I said, Amy, this is going great, but like, you know, this is very much of a downer. Do you have something positive? And she looks at me and she says, Russ, I got nothing but doom and gloom. And I said, well, there must be something. She said, how about I give people 3 things that they can do to protect their own personal cybersecurity? I said, that's perfect. And it was. And she gave it to us and we were laughing about it. And we ended this cybersecurity on a positive. But the point is, without being Pollyanna-ish, you would like to end on a positive if you can, right? Sometimes it's just not going to happen. So I sometimes don't even say this to the guest, but I try to order those topics so that the last topic is going to give hope, right? It's going to be, what's the future look like? What are you really excited about? And that is helpful because it makes sure to some extent that we're always ending the podcast on a hopeful note. And so people don't say, I'm not tuning into this. This guy just depresses me all the time. So those are the 2 reasons: to deliver on the contract, to actually let the person talk about what they wanted to talk about in the first place, and to make sure that I can engineer a positive ending.
I also find it keeps your time tighter. I think Jen and I have had sometimes we'll get into these conversations, and why I thought it was good is because we sometimes get into conversations and like we're 45 minutes in and we've just we didn't spin our wheels when we were talking. It was all good stuff. But at the end of the day, we really want this show to be 25 minutes to 30 minutes.
And you've just created yourself a big editing challenge.
Yeah, that's right.
It refocuses your intention. And that's why I like it, because it does go back to kind of a radio-esque style, because that's what we did in radio, is that you would need to know. And now it's funny because podcasts are a lot longer, but I remember thinking like, how do I put information in a 1-minute break, in a 30-second break? And you had to have that in. So I like the way
that's a great point.
It's a talent.
Yeah. and it keeps you more concise. But I want to know some dirt. Have you ever had a guest where you do the first part and they're like, and you're like, what did you want to talk about? And then you talk about it and you're like, I didn't like that. And you just edit it out.
No, I must say that we only do very light. We have only taken out sentences that somebody said like once or twice in 310 episodes. I make a joke and it probably limits the quality of the podcast, but we're pretty much one take wonders. Like it's I don't want to diminish what the editors do, but they're not taking out bit segments.
They're doing other things that are important.
I make sure that we're within 2-3 minutes of our target on both segments. And since the podcast, who the hell cares if it's 25 or 31 minutes, but we never have gone 35 or 40 minutes.
I think that's great. And I think actually it speaks to one of the bigger origins of it, which is a direct voice to the researcher, to the academic, to the scholar, and you're not censoring. I think that's what I love about this. And I think what's so great about the future of everything is it's this direct voice from Stanford, from the researchers, from the people. There's no censoring, there's no mincing or anything like that. This is really what's happening. If you want to hear really what's happening with this certain field and in this research, break through the rhetoric, this is the show.
Thank you for saying that. And no one has precisely said it like that to me before, but you're absolutely right. Any kind of taking sentences out or rearranging paragraphs, any scholar paying careful attention to that edit would be infuriated, would probably call me up and say WTF or some version of that. And it could wreck the show. It could get the word out that Altman is going to engineer what you say to his sensibility, and that could be death.
That's great. Can we jump to, I want to jump to video a bit, because the future of everything, it's been video the whole time I've been working on it. And in the last year, we've really started to lean into short form, and we've gone from really this focus of just the long form video version. And we talk about it a lot in our monthly larger meeting, because you have some thoughts on this and you've come to the table with a lot of really cool ideas. I'd love to hear your insight on how shorts and the shorter form component has really started to add to the whole.
Now I remember you had asked us about YouTube, and for whatever reason, somebody who wasn't me thought it was a good idea to start recording these. And I think it is a good idea because, as you know, YouTube has become a major thing. And now I have, if not 300, probably more than 50 taped interviews with video. Mm-hmm. So the shorts was very organic. I noticed in my own viewing of YouTube that there were these shorts. And so I came to you and the team and said, should we be doing shorts? I mean, I do know that we have statistics about listeners, and even though they should listen to every single freaking word I say, they don't. They get off after, 63%, I think it was last week. And I said, and I know that whether I like it or not, people's attention span is getting shorter and shorter. And so we started doing shorts from the episodes where we just trusted our producer to find some spicy moments and throw them up. And then we actually made it a little bit more complicated, and we added a new thing, which I love. It's called The Future in a Minute. So remember, the name of the podcast is The Future of Everything. And now we have this segment where at the end of the interview, I ask rapid fire 5 questions, and I ask the guest to give me 5 short answers. And be honest, the reason we did that was we thought this might give us nice sound bites that would be very compatible with the shorts. And as you know, because you present this data to us every month, these are now getting, 2x or 3x the watches than the actual episode. And it's not my first choice. I want everybody to sit down and listen to the whole damn episode, but I get it and I'll take it. I'll take it as a way for people to get a little spicy moment from the episode. Maybe they'll follow it and listen to the whole thing. But even if they don't, maybe it gives them an impression of scholarship at Stanford that is still positive and interesting. So I'm fine with it. More than that, I love it.
I guess we've talked about this a bit, Jen, on the show, but I've really come around in the last year on that short form component. Formerly, I thought it's a discovery mechanism to drive to the long form. But to your point, Russ, there's an audience that is in the short form. And if at the end of the day, we can double, triple the reach of the show through the short form piece of content, and we're still doing what the higher intention of the show is, and we're reaching those people through that short form, then that's also a win. And we're starting to look at the combination of those two. So for YouTube analytics, we're actually starting to look at the long form and the short form together and looking at the totality of those two things together, even though they're two different algorithms and potentially two different audiences, there's still the holistic nature of the two together that I think is super important.
I agree. And so there was a short period of time where I was thinking of it as purely a leader into the longer episodes. And now I realize it is a different experience, which also has value. And I shouldn't deprecate it as a second-class product of this effort. It's a first-class product. It's just the one that came second.
Good way way to put it.
I just feel like we could talk to Russ the whole time. Like,
Let's do it.
I
Let's
just
do
want to
it.
nerd out and chat with him.
It could be like the Lord of the Rings. We could have a troika.
There you go. I love it. I just have one thing I'd love to ask from you just before we go, because there's been such good stuff here.
Sticking to your
Appreciate it.
notes.
That's right. Maybe just sort of any pieces of advice, like 8 years now.
Yeah, we're putting up some big numbers.
We just crossed 1 million plays actually on the show, which is quite incredible.
I would say a couple things. I would say it's a lot like putting up a website. Putting up the website is not hard. Maintaining the website is hard. So everybody has a few podcasts in them. Anybody you meet on the street could probably entertain us for a few podcasts, but then doing the grind of having a plan for how you're going to do this in the long term, that is hard. And that leads to the second. So the first thing is it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's the first piece of advice. And the second one is, I know one of my best friends has a solo. He tapes it, he edits it, he puts it out. It's pretty successful. But guess what? He's retired. So he has like infinite time to do this. In general, especially if you're a professor type, you want to have some communications professionals. I surround myself with people like you, Neil, and you folks from the School of Engineering comms. They know what they're talking about. They can do communications in their sleep. How many times they've prevented me from stepping in bad stuff, can't even count. And it makes it way more fun because they come with a totally different professional view of what we're doing and how it can be done. And so I would say be very careful about trying to do this as a solo operation. This really takes a village, and it's more fun as a village, and you'll be able to have that momentum to run the marathon and not just do 7 great episodes and then say, I can't do this anymore. It's killing me.
I always say too, be passionate about what you're talking about, which you are, and then it's not going to feel like a slug.
Yeah. And also know why you're doing it. So one of the great gifts that I have is I'm at the same university as Andrew Huberman, you may have heard of, right? So right away from day one, there was Andrew Huberman and that there was me. And that I was never going to be Andrew for a million reasons. I don't really want to be Andrew Huberman. It's really important to know why you're doing this, to stick with your mission, and to understand what success looks like. So, for example, we don't really chase topics that are very sexy that will get us more listeners. But guess what? There's Stanford faculty doing excellent work in unsexy areas, and I want them to be on the show too. And if I don't get a zillion hits from that show, that's fine, because the corpus is a very good representation of what's happening in academics in 2017 to 2026.
I think that's a really good way to a cherry on top of this conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining us here today on another episode.
Thank you. It's super fun. You guys are great. Thanks for having me.
We'll have to have you back.
You said it.
Well, Jen, another awesome episode. Obviously, I've had the fortune to work with Russ for the last 4 years, maybe a little bit more than that actually now. And I get to work with him remotely on an ongoing basis and see him a couple of times a year in person when I make trips down to Stanford. And Russ is just an amazing guy, and I really appreciate everything that he shared with us. He really does believe what he said, shedding light on his colleagues across Stanford, giving them a voice and an opportunity to share their research and sort of the meaning behind it.
Yeah, he's just such an accomplished guy, which I feel like if you were to meet him or think of him beforehand, you might be intimidated. But I vibed with him so well because obviously like broadcaster, but he also agreed with a lot of things that I had to say. I felt heard. I liked it.
You felt heard, especially on the refusing to meet with the guest beforehand. He is quite ardent about that. So
I want to clarify things. When we meet with guests beforehand, I love doing it.
And in fairness, he did talk about the larger team. It's not like someone on the team hasn't talked to the guest. There is multiple outreaches from folks on the team ahead of time to sort of help line things up and to make sure that, you know, they've thought through the tech and answered questions ahead of time. But I do think there's something really special about that. But there's something special about hopping on the interview and just getting into those questions that are in the moment, fresh and new, without sort of all the prep and everything sort of in the background. So I do agree with you about that, Jen. I'm still going to do pre-interviews, and I'm still going to line up questions for every one of our interviews.
There you go. I'm happy with that.
That's why we work so well together, Jen. We're a good pair. There you go. Why don't you read us out, Jen?
Thank you for tuning in to the Continuing Studies Podcast, a podcast for higher education podcasters. We hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. If you enjoyed the show, we encourage you to follow and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred platform so you'll never miss an episode. But if you found this episode particularly valuable, please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues who also might be interested in higher education podcasts. We also invite you to join your peers on higheredpods.com, where you can connect with other podcasters in the higher education space and learn from others in the field. Thank you for being part of our community. We look forward to continuing to bring you valuable insights and conversations around higher education podcasts. See you in the next episode.
Wow.